Previously, we saw the function f of x equals the absolute value of x. And we saw what its graph looked like. Its graph looks something like this. We had this V shape with its point at the origin. And that's nice and all, but this is not the only function with an absolute value in it. So we might consider the question, what about other functions that contain an absolute value? So for example, g of x is the absolute value of x minus 3. H of x is 2 times the absolute value of x plus 1. Or even something like k of x equals negative 3 times absolute value 2x plus 6 minus 1. We could use a graphing calculator to see what these look like. In order to do that, we first need to be able to actually enter an absolute value on the calculator. So to enter a graph, we hit this y equals. Right, I'm just going to use y1. To enter the absolute value, I'm going to hit this math key, num. Right, so I hit the right arrow to get into the num menu. And then the very first option is this ABS, that's the absolute value. So if I just enter absolute value of x and look at the graph, I have that V shape that I did earlier. To get my axes to be on the same scale, I went to zoom and selected option number 5, zoom square. So this is the absolute value graph that I had earlier. To get the absolute value of x minus 3 instead, I say x minus 3. And make sure that's inside the parentheses, so that's inside the absolute value. Okay, interesting. Let's try this next one. So I want to have 2 times the absolute value of just x. And then outside the absolute value, I want to have a plus 1. Okay, so that looks like it's a little bit narrower and a little bit higher up. Let's try that last one. We'll have negative 3 times the absolute value of 2x plus 6, and the whole thing minus 2. Okay, so that one seems to be upside down and off to the side somehow. We see a pattern in these graphs, right? These graphs are all V-shapes, but they are moved around and scaled, either stretched, squished, something like that. And what we see in the functions is that these are functions that contain an absolute value composed with something linear. We might have a linear function inside the absolute value, outside the absolute value, or we might even have both. But they're all absolute values composed with linear functions. We call a function like this an absolute value function. And we can learn a method for graphing one of these absolute value functions based on our knowledge that they're all the same shape, which is what we're going to do in the next video.